Okay, so at this point you're ready to fly. I'm just going to go over some of these flight notes with you. Is that if you flip into gyro heading hold mode before the rotors start spinning, that the gyros can actually drift and put the servos hard over, because if the gyros think that the ship is yawing, then it's going to apply full servo position to try to prevent that yaw. But if it's sitting on the ground and the rotors aren't spinning, that won't correct the yaw, so it just ends up in a hard over situation. So it's just not a good idea to be into hold mode when you're sitting stationary on the ground. It's better to wait till your disc is up to speed, and that's the only time I use this switch when I'm flying, is after I start up the rotor disc and get it up to maybe 25–50% of speed. I'll just go ahead and flip it into hold mode. So the other thing is that the 401 gyros need to be initiated, and I also do this with my 520s too, because they seem to initiate a little bit better if you do it, but they need to be initiated in hold mode. So when you get ready to power up the ship, make sure you put your gyro switch into heading hold mode and then add power to the ship. Then you want to verify, and I just do it with one gyro. I look at one gyro because I've never had a situation where one goes solid and the others don't. You just want to verify you get a solid light on the 401. If it doesn't initialize, you'll end up with a flashing light. If you end up with that flashing light, just go ahead and disconnect power and then replug it in, and then almost guaranteed every time, the second time you do it, it'll come up and initialize and go solid. Then once you verify that you get a solid light, then you go ahead and push it back and get out of hold mode until you're ready to take off. So after you power up the ship, you want to verify that your light on your controller goes solid green, and your speed controls are initialized. I usually don't make it a matter of course to check that. They usually come up, or they always come up every single time, so I don't really worry about it too much. So we have the flight mode switch, and we have normal, stunt 1, and stunt 2. So in normal mode, as you know, the throttles are not active, so I like to do that for setup, and I just like it almost for safety too. It's just nice to know that no matter what happens, you can't apply throttle when you're in normal mode. So if you're, well, right at the very beginning, if you're not a very experienced pilot or whatever, you'll want to fly in idle up 1, which allows you to pull back on the throttle to chop on this stick, to chop your throttles. And so that just allows you to get those throttles turned off a little bit quicker if you get into a bad situation. But really you want to fly the V22 in the full governor mode, so the throttles are always in governor mode, and to do that you need to switch into stunt 2. So if you fly over your head and you start getting any altitude, when you come down you start making descents, you're going to be pulling these throttles all the way back. And if you do that in stunt 1, you can actually shut your throttles off, and that the V22 doesn't fly very well when you shut the throttles off. So you want to make sure you fly around with in stunt 2 whenever you're flying any elevation over your head. The way you control the throttles when you're in that mode is this throttle hold switch, and if you get into trouble you can quickly flick that. So you always need to fly with your finger. I always fly with a finger on that switch ready to pull it at any time. And then if I'm ever flying my simulator, I always make sure I use this switch even in the simulator. So I just get almost, it's automatic for me to pull this switch if I get into trouble. The other thing you want to make sure before you take off is that, or add power, is that your throttle is all the way down, or you're in or at least below quarter stick. You can be flat stick or flat pitch, which would be quarter stick, but you wouldn't want to turn on your throttles when you're at full pitch, because one rotor won't spool up the same speed as the other, and you're going to have a problem. So just make sure I would just make sure this stick is all the way down, and then when I fly, I just pull it all the way to stunt 2. And we've got the slow spool up feature assigned on the Castle creation speed control, so they won't come up real quick. They'll come up nice and slow and steady. Now, I never use any of the trims on the face of my transmitter, and I never have a problem like I get a drift or something like that. It just doesn't seem like I get it, and so that's just the way I do it. I just never use any of my face trims. It seems like the ship flies just fine. If you want to try flying around in rate mode, you can, but if you do get some drifts, you'll want to adjust that out with the linkages. And it flies okay in rate mode. I think it flies a lot better in hold mode. After you pick the ship up, we'll see if there's any oscillation. So it's just like a tail rotor on any model helicopter. If you get some oscillations, the gain settings are too high. On the gain curves in the configurator program, there's an autofill box, and if you check that, then while you're adjusting the gains in hover mode, it'll automatically adjust the gains and the other nacelle positions. So when you're adjusting gains, especially for the very first time, make sure you have your autofill box checked. There's two programs. There's two setup programs, one for the 520 gyro and one for the 401 gyro, so those need slightly different gains settings. I have a tendency to run my pitch gain a little high because in rapid descents you'll get a little bit of pitch up, but if you have your pitch gain, you keep your pitch gain set high, you won't feel any of that. The gyro will take care of that for you. If you feel the sticks are too sensitive for you, and I have a tendency to run my sticks a little sensitive, you can go into the volume curves, and with the autofill box checked there, just go ahead and turn down some of those volumes, and it'll make the ship a little less sensitive. The ship's gyro stabilized, so it is quite stable. If there's no wind, you can fly it for several seconds hands off, and just make one little adjustment, and then let it hover again for several seconds without even touching the control, so it works real well. If it's not working that well, then something's going on. In airplane mode, so the way I recommend training yourself for airplane mode is whether it's a slider or a switch, what you want to do is limit the total in your transmitter, limit the total using your endpoint settings, limit the total throw you can get out of a full throw on your slider. So if you knock the value down, if it's currently the endpoint set close to 100%, let's say, then we'll just set it 10%. So then when you give a full throw of your slider, the nacelles will only go maybe 10 degrees. The ship will fly just like a helicopter that is flying in forward flight, except you won't be needing to apply forward cyclic to keep it moving. It'll just want to keep moving. So you can slow it down by pulling up the nose, but you can just let it kind of seek its own speed and fly around. Do figure eights, right hand and left hand figure eights, and ascents and descents. And then when you get comfortable with that, you can go back into your endpoint settings and dial in another 10%. That'll get you about 20 degrees. And now when you give it full nacelle angle, it'll convert to about 20 degrees. And you can get used to that and just slowly work into it. When you get to anything over 45 degrees, we'll need to start doing some checks to make sure the pitch governor is working right, and I'll talk about that a little bit later.